In this video, I'm gonna answer 4 big questions. Number 1, what are the top 5 ways to improve your cholesterol as quickly as possible? Watch all the way to the end for this one. Number 2, does walking on an incline burn fat more effectively than not walking on an incline? Number 3, what is my least favorite piece of exercise equipment I've ever bought? I think this is gonna surprise you. And number 4, how to stop failing with your diet. Let's get into it. Before we dive into the questions, if you don't know how many calories or how much protein to eat in order to lose fat sustainably, I have a free calorie calculator. The link is in the description. Click the link, sign up, and I will send you a link to my free calorie calculator so you know exactly how many calories, how much protein to eat every day to lose fat sustainably. Let's get into the questions. I'm gonna start off with the most fun one, which is what is my least used piece of exercise equipment I've ever bought, or my least favorite? If you've followed me for a while, you know I'm not a bodybuilder. Even if you haven't followed me for a while, look at me, I'm not a bodybuilder. I love training for strength and athletic performance, doing it for jujitsu, trying to get the splits. I was a powerlifter for many years. I've never really cared about getting as big as possible. I just like trying to get as strong and as athletic as possible. With that being said, when I was outfitting my home gym, one of the pieces of equipment that really kept catching my eye was the standing preacher curl. I've always in my mind been like, I would love to love bodybuilding. I would love to love focusing on more isolation exercises. I would love to love training my arms. I've just always wanted to do that. So I was like, you know what? I'll get the preacher curl. Plus it looks cool. Like it's a cool piece of equipment to have in the gym. It has essentially functioned as a coat rack or a rack for me to hang my bands on. I have used it maybe 4 times in a year. I don't use it at all. And I've had this idea like, yeah, I'm gonna train my biceps. I'll do a bicep specialization phase. And then as soon as I do it, I'm like, this just isn't fun to me. Nothing against the people who like doing it. It's just training biceps, trying to get bigger arms, I don't care. Trying to get the splits, front splits, side splits, trying to improve my vertical jump, trying to deadlift 4 times my body weight. Yes, all day, every day, it's fun for me. Training my biceps is just fucking boring. If anyone wants to buy my preacher curl, let me know. Like, we can work something out. Question number 2, I feel like such a failure. I can't commit to a deficit for more than a month. Before I get into my answer, which is gonna be more practical, I have a whole separate video all about the science of motivation and mastering your psychology. So if you think this is more of a mental issue, highly encourage you to watch that video. The link is in the description. I'm gonna give you a couple things to think about from a more practical perspective. What I'll first say is, I'm sorry that you're feeling like a failure. That sucks. I get it, that sucks. It's human nature to feel that way at any point in time, at least in some aspect of our lives. Like, I think we can all relate to feeling like a failure. With that being said, it's also important to know that doesn't help, right? Like if your friend told you that they weren't doing something they know they should be doing, you wouldn't say like, well, you're a failure. But when you're talking to yourself, it's very easy to fall into that train of thought and that conversation. So what I would say is it's okay to feel that way, but I would strongly urge you to be aware of how you're talking to yourself, because the research is overwhelmingly clear that shaming others and shaming yourself does not actually help to promote long-term change. With that said, there's 2 major things I want to discuss here, and it has to do with your perspective in regard to your progress as well as how you're approaching your deficit. The first thing is, I've found the major reason people really struggle to stay consistent with their nutrition, especially when it comes to fat loss nutrition, is because they try to eat as little as possible so that they can lose weight as quickly as possible. Another manifestation of this is they will try to eat as clean or as healthy as possible to lose weight as quickly as possible. And really what this boils down to is trying to lose weight as quickly as possible. That's the major issue here. If you feel like, hey, I'm gonna eat 800 calories a day, or I'm gonna eat 1200 calories a day, or I'm gonna starve myself to try and lose weight as quickly as possible, or I'm only gonna eat clean foods, I'm not gonna eat anything dirty or bad just so I can lose weight as quickly as possible, you're setting yourself up for failure. Number 1, because trying to lose weight as quickly as possible sucks. I'm gonna talk about that in a second. But number 2, because you can't be perfect with your nutrition. People have this idea of like, I'm gonna be perfect, I'm gonna be perfect. The research on this is outrageously clear, and it's one of the things that when I was younger, 18, 19, 20, that completely changed my entire coaching perspective. It was like, the research is very clear that rigid dieters, the people who try and be super, super, super strict, have a spectacularly high failure rate, because how long can you really be perfect for? How long can you starve yourself for? How long can you not have any treats or bad foods, right? It's it's not realistic in terms of living a long, healthy, sustainable life. It might be realistic for a week, maybe, but even that would suck. And the way that I think about it is, if you do a certain method and from those methods you get results, well, if the method you used was unsustainable, then the results you get from that method are also unsustainable. So we need to have a more sustainable approach. If you're trying to reduce your calories to the point of starvation, and or you're not letting yourself have any unclean or processed foods or any of your favorite foods, I think you're making a big mistake. Being successful with fat loss is learning how to have a more flexible approach. And again, research is clear that flexible dieters are far more successful than rigid dieters. And the second thing I want to consider here is your rate of progress. And many people feel like if they're not losing 10 pounds in the first week or first 2 weeks, then it's failing. And I've had people say like, oh my God, I've only lost 4 pounds in a month. And I'm like, only 4 pounds in a month? What do you mean only? Why does the word only fit in there? What happened in your brain to make you think that only belonged in that sentence? 4 pounds in a month is wildly impressive and a sign of tremendous progress. If we're looking at a great rate of fat loss progress, it's an average of 1/2 pound to 2 pounds per week. For some reason, when people hear the like 1/2 pound to 2 pounds, their brain just goes, so I should be losing 2 pounds a week. Nope. 2 pounds a week is mainly reserved for people who have a lot of body fat to lose and they're taking a pretty significant deficit. They have a pretty steep calorie deficit at the beginning. If you don't have a ton of body fat to lose, I would put you between that 1/2 pound to 1 pound a week on average. Now, when we're talking about averages, let's say we're looking at 12 weeks, right? 12 weeks in a calorie deficit. You might lose, we'll call it 6 pounds in the first 3 weeks, which is normal. It's not necessarily all fat, stomach content, glycogen, water, all that stuff. So if you lose 6 pounds in the first 2 weeks, let's say you don't lose anything else for the next 4 weeks. You're 6 weeks in and 6 pounds down. That's an average of 1 pound per week. You're making great progress. But could you imagine getting 2 weeks in and then not losing anything else for the next 4 weeks? You'd probably think it's not working. No, it is working. We're looking at averages, not absolutes, every single day or every single week. So keep that in mind, because if you think you're not losing weight quickly enough, odds are you're holding yourself to an unrealistically high expectation and you'll end up quitting because you think it's not working when it is working. You're just not patient enough. Question number 3, does walking on an incline burn more fat, or is that another BS claim? I'll say this, walking on an incline is an amazing form of exercise that I actually thoroughly enjoy, and I prefer walking on an incline more than I like walking on flat ground. I'll explain in a second. But from a fat loss perspective, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if you walk on flat or on incline. It doesn't matter if you cycle, doesn't matter if you go on an elliptical, doesn't matter if you swim, doesn't matter. If you're not eating in a calorie deficit, you're not gonna lose body fat, which is why, by the way, I have my free calorie calculator. If you don't know how many calories to eat in order to sustain a healthy, sustainable calorie deficit, click the link in my description for my free calorie calculator. I'll tell you exactly how many calories and how much protein to eat to lose fat sustainably. From a fat loss perspective, walking on an incline is not more or less beneficial than any other form of cardio, because realistically, cardio isn't done from a fat loss perspective. Cardio is done for your health, your heart health, your lung health, your cardiovascular health, overall, your mental health, emotional health. You don't do cardio to lose fat. It can help with fat loss because you're burning calories, but it doesn't matter from the perspective of if your nutrition isn't in check and you're not in a calorie deficit, you're not gonna be losing body fat. Don't think about exercise from a calorie perspective. Think about exercise from a health and an enjoyment perspective. With that in mind, I love incline walking. And I should say I use love oddly here. I really hate it. It sucks. It's much more difficult, but it's an easier way for me to get my heart rate up. If I go on an incline, it makes it more difficult. I get my heart rate up more quickly, puts me into zone 2 or whatever I wanna be put into, without necessarily needing to increase the speed at which I'm moving. If I'm on flat ground, I have to run more quickly in order to get my heart rate up. Whereas with the incline, I can get my heart rate up without having to go faster and without the added impact on my joints. So if I'm going for a longer duration, maybe slightly higher intensity, like a zone 2 or zone 3 style workout, I'll go on an incline for 20, 30, 40, 50, 60 minutes because it's much lower impact, it's much more comfortable for me, and I can get my heart rate higher without needing to run faster. So it's an amazing form of exercise, but it's not better or worse for fat loss. Question number 4, final question. This one I'm gonna go in depth on, and I'm gonna outline the 5 best ways for you to improve your cholesterol. And the question that was asked is, what are the best ways you suggest to lower cholesterol? I'm saying improve your cholesterol because I want to talk about how to lower your LDL and increase your HDL. So it's not just about lowering it, it's about improving the ratio of the two. Before I even get into the 5 best ways, or what ways I consider to be the 5 best ways, I'll start by saying, if you haven't spoken to your doctor about this, please speak to your doctor. I'm not a doctor. I'm not giving medical advice. I'm just giving you overall general health and fitness advice. If you haven't spoken to your doctor, please do. Also, what I will say is this. I'm gonna give you what I believe are the 5 best ways to improve your cholesterol. I would imagine many people watching this will think, well, I already do this, I already do that. I want you to be very objective with how consistently you do these things. One thing that I've always found very interesting about the research on health in large-scale populations is that the people who struggle, whether it's to lose fat, to improve their cholesterol, to reduce their blood pressure, whatever it is, they often overestimate how consistent they've actually been. And so, for example, with fat loss and weight loss, people who struggle to lose weight, they overestimate how consistent they've been. They often underestimate how much they're eating. And people who struggle to gain weight overestimate how much they've been eating. Either way, when you're struggling to do something, you often conflate or are confused on how consistent you've actually been. And this is why in the Inner Circle, we have our consistency calendar. Basically, if you've been consistent on a day, then you mark yourself consistent. We've got a green dot in the Inner Circle. Great, you were consistent that day. And consistency could mean anything, including what I'll discuss in terms of the 5 ways to improve your cholesterol. But if you've been consistent with those things, green that day. If you were inconsistent, red that day. And if you see on the app, you'll notice like you could have a whole month filled with green days, red days, and we'll tell you how consistent you've been out of 100%. So let's say you've been consistent for 24 days out of 30 that month. That's about 80% consistency. And if you aren't being at least 80% consistent with these things, 80% is a B minus, right? We've all been to school. B minus, it's not outstanding. You're not like getting the A plus grade, it's not a 4.0. It's enough to make progress. It's enough to learn. It's enough to get better. If you're not getting at least a B minus, you can't really be upset with the lack of progress that you're making, because if you're getting C plus or below, like that's just not good. So I encourage you to be at least 80% consistent with this stuff and objectively track your progress and your consistency so you know. With that being said, let's get into the top 5 ways to improve your cholesterol. Number 1, most important, is going to be your nutrition. And the general term for this is you want to adopt a heart-healthy diet. But what does that mean? You're gonna wanna have a lot of fiber, fruits, and vegetables. And this shouldn't be surprising. Fiber, fruits, vegetables, whole grains, legumes, beans, lentils, these things are unbelievably important. You're gonna wanna limit things like saturated fat and trans fats for sure. It doesn't mean you can't have them at all, but it does mean that the majority of your diet, at least 80% of your diet, should be whole, minimally processed foods. You want to emphasize fiber, you want to emphasize lean proteins, you want to emphasize really high quality fats, nuts, olives, olive oil, avocado. These things are super, super, super important for not just your overall cholesterol, but your health as an entire whole. Having a lot of variety, a lot of color, and what I would really say focus on most importantly is fiber. Fiber is unbelievably important, and I'm not gonna hate on fiber supplements. What I will say is what's more important than taking a fiber supplement is actually eating your fiber from whole foods. Things like raspberries, things like blackberries, things like avocados. These are all things that are super nutrient dense and also very high in fiber, which is gonna be remarkably important for your cholesterol. Number 2, you want to get at least 150 minutes of moderate physical activity every single week. Now, this could be, again, walking, cycling, it could be elliptical, it could be Stairmaster, it could be swimming, it could be hiking, it could be rollerblading, whatever you enjoy, but 150 minutes per week of moderate physical activity. If you want to do higher intensity work, that's great. About 75 minutes of that per week is wonderful. I generally prefer the lower intensity, longer duration stuff, but I also know not everyone has that time available to them. The most important thing is that you're constantly trying to stay physically active. Every single day, trying to get movement in. If you could get at least 7,500 steps per day, doesn't matter if you do it all at once or sparse throughout the day, just get your movement in and aim for at least 150 minutes per week. Number 3, maintaining a healthy weight and specifically a healthy body fat is outrageously important. It's not as much nowadays. I know like in the 2017, 2018, 2019 era, there was a huge movement saying that people can be really, really healthy with a lot of extra body fat. What's important to understand is you can present as healthy with a lot of body fat in the moment, but the issue is what happens if you maintain that high level of body fat for 5, 10, 15, 20 plus years. And if you think about it, how many very, very, very overweight old people have you seen? And the answer is probably not many, if any at all. By the time people start getting into their 70s, 80s, 90s, you don't really see many people who are severely overweight because of the negative health effects that takes on your body. Maintaining a healthy body weight and specifically a body fat is unbelievably important. Even a modest fat loss of 5 to 10% of your body weight, especially if you have a lot to lose, can have tremendous benefits on your cholesterol. Again, if you don't know how many calories to eat to lose fat sustainably, I have a free calorie calculator. The link is in the description. That will show you how many calories and how much protein to eat in order to lose fat sustainably. Moving on to number 4 and number 5, the first 3 were things for you to really focus on, to add into your life. Now I'm gonna talk about things to take away from your life, or at least severely limit in your life. Number 4 being smoking. And by the way, this includes vaping. I know this is a huge thing right now, especially with the kids. I feel old, I'm only 33. I see a lot of kids vaping. It's terrible. It's fucking really, really bad for you. And I think we all know that smoking is bad for you. And I'm not saying it's easy to quit, but you should really fucking stop. And at the very least, try and reduce it. Even just reducing what you're doing is unbelievably helpful. So if you can't go cold turkey, that's fine. I would encourage you to stop. And for whatever it's worth, there's a lot of research around nicotine. And I know nicotine gets a bad reputation because of its association with cigarettes and cigars and things like that. But nicotine in and of itself isn't necessarily bad for you. And there are real potential cognitive benefits. Not gonna go down that route. What I'm saying is, if you need to use something like nicotine patches or even like Zyn packets that are nicotine based, and yes, they're very highly addictive, but there are other things that are addictive that aren't necessarily bad for you. If I have to choose between nicotine and tobacco smoke, I choose nicotine 100% of the time. If it's difficult for you to stop because of the nicotine, get the patches, get the Zyn, do something that will allow you to get the nicotine without the horrific side effects of smoking and inhaling tobacco smoke, or even just vaping as well. So stop smoking, please, for the love of God. They put a skull and crossbones on it for a reason. Please stop doing it. And number 5, and the 5th way to improve your cholesterol, is to, at the very least, limit your alcohol consumption. I'm not saying stop altogether. I'm also not saying alcohol is good for you. There's been a big movement in the science-based fitness industry over the last year or so to demonize alcohol. I'm not on board with. I don't think it's really good to demonize almost anything except fucking smoking. There is a fair amount of research showing that moderate alcohol consumption, depending on the alcohol, can actually have some beneficial effects on cholesterol. I'm not saying to drink all the time. I'm saying, again, to moderate it. And for many people, they actually need to reduce their alcohol intake. If you're excessively drinking alcohol, it's not good for many things, not least of which includes your cholesterol. There are many other major issues as well, but cholesterol can be severely negatively impacted by excessive alcohol consumption. If you want me to do a whole separate video on sort of my take on alcohol in the fitness industry right now, because it is getting a very, very bad reputation and people are completely demonizing it like you should never have it, I don't fall into that camp. I tend to go down the middle with that one. If you want that video, let me know in the comments section if you have any specific questions about it. I'd be more than happy to answer. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, please give it a thumbs up. Subscribe to the channel if you don't already. Have a wonderful day. I'll talk to you next week.